The day Cole Vance turned 18, the state of California stopped pretending it cared about him. There was no cake, there was no handshake, there was just a gray Tuesday morning in a building that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, and a manila envelope sliding across a laminate desk that had been scratched by 1,000 hands before his. The man behind the desk was named Dobbins, Gerald Dobbins. He had the face of someone who had long ago made peace with the gap between what the job was supposed to be and what it actually was. He was not a cruel man. He was tired in the way that accumulates in a man who has watched too many boys walk in frightened and walk out hollow. The tiredness had settled into the lines around his eyes and the particular flatness of his voice, the voice of someone who had learned to deliver information without inflection, because inflection implied he had something left to give. Cole did not look frightened. He had not looked frightened in a long time. He had learned somewhere around age 10 that fear was a signal you sent out into the world, and the world had a way of answering it in ways you did not want. So he had stopped sending it. He had learned instead to carry his fear inward, to compress it into something dense and quiet and functional, something that did not show. He picked up the envelope without being asked. Inside a birth certificate with a watermark he had never noticed before, a social security card in a plastic sleeve, $200 in cash, the bill slightly soft from handling, and a bus ticket, one way, destination Covenant, Wyoming. He had never heard of it. There was one more thing, Dobbins said. He pulled a second envelope from the top drawer of his desk, the kind of envelope that announced its own importance before you opened it. Thick cream-colored paper, a law firm's return address embossed in the upper left corner. "This came for you 6 weeks ago," Dobbins said. "We were holding it until today. Your grandfather passed, left you something out in Wyoming. That's where the bus is going." Cole looked at the envelope. His name was written on the front in handwriting he did not recognize. Small, precise letters, slightly forward-leaning like the person writing them had been in the habit of economy, of not wasting space. He knew the name Silas Blackwood the way you know the name of a country you have never visited. It existed somewhere. It had geography, but it had no texture, no smell, no weight of lived experience behind it. His mother's father, a man who had taken him in after she died when Cole was 5 years old, and who had kept him for 6 months before surrendering him to the state. That was the word they used in the file. Surrendered, like a flag going down. Cole had stopped wondering about him before he was 12. "What did he leave me?" Cole asked. His voice was flat, carrying none of the things he did not intend to show. Dobbins looked at a note on his desk. Some land, 40 acres outside Covenant, undeveloped, and a structure, some kind of outbuilding. There are back taxes owed on the property. The lawyer's number is in the envelope. She said to call her when you got this. Cole folded both envelopes and put them inside his jacket against his chest. He picked up his duffel bag, the same one he had carried between 7 different placements over 13 years, its canvas worn soft at the handles from all the times he had picked it up and moved on. "Good luck," Dobbins said. Cole walked out of the office and down the long corridor and through the double doors and into the California morning. He did not look back. Not because he was being dramatic about it, simply because there was nothing behind him worth the energy of a final glance. He had learned that early. Looking back at places you were leaving only made the next place harder to settle into. You kept your eyes forward, your hands empty, your expectations low, and you moved. The bus station was 20 minutes away on foot. He walked it. He found a payphone near the ticket counter that still worked, which surprised him, and he dialed the number on the law firm letterhead before he had fully decided to. The phone rang twice. The voice that answered was precise and professional and carried the particular energy of someone who scheduled their days in 15-minute increments and did not appreciate deviation. "Albright Law, this is Ren Albright." He told her who he was. There was a short pause, the sound of a chair adjusting papers moving. "Mr. Vance, I've been expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss." He did not know how to respond to that. "You did not mourn a ghost." "The property," he said. "Yes." She moved efficiently into it. 40 acres approximately 20 miles outside Covenant in Fremont County. The county has a lien for unpaid property taxes. The total outstanding balance is just over $6,000. You have until the end of the month before the county begins seizure proceedings. He did the math in the time it took her to draw breath. $200, $6,000 owed. There's an offer on the table, she continued. A development company called Westward Horizons has been trying to acquire parcels in that corridor for some time. They've extended their offer to you. $10,000 for the full parcel as is. They'll cover the back taxes and all associated legal fees out of the purchase price. He was quiet for a moment. What's on the land, he asked. She paused. One structure, a Quonset hut. The county records describe it as a single outbuilding utilities off-grid. Well water generator power, no additional improvements on record. He stood with the receiver against his ear and thought about that. A man who had turned down $10,000 for a piece of land with nothing on it but a metal shed. A man who had lived on that land until he died. A man who had, for reasons Cole had never been given and had eventually stopped asking about, handed a 5-year-old child to the state of California and disappeared. Why did he turn down their offer, Cole asked, when Westward Horizons came to him? Why did he say no? A longer pause this time. I was not his attorney then. I came into this at the end. Cole looked out through the fingerprinted glass of the payphone enclosure at the flow of people moving through the station. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone with a direction that had been decided before they arrived. I'm going to look at it first, he said. Mr. Vance, the offer has a deadline. The back taxes have a deadline. If you travel out there and spend time you don't have, and then decide to sell, the window may have closed. Westward is motivated, but they're not patient. I'll be on the bus to Covenant today, he said. I'll call you when I get there. She exhaled, controlled and professional. Very well. There's a key waiting for you at the bus depot in Covenant. A lockbox at the ticket counter. The combination is your date of birth. Your grandfather arranged it. His date of birth. The day Silas Blackwood had surrendered him. The line went quiet. He hung up the phone. He stood in the station for a long time after that, watching the boards flip and the buses load, thinking about a man who set a lockbox combination using the birthday of the child he gave away. Whether that was cruelty or something else entirely, he could not yet say. He did not have enough information. He had almost nothing: a name on a deed, a debt he could not pay, and a question that had no answer yet. He bought a bag of peanuts from a vending machine and ate them on a bench and waited for his bus. The journey took 2 days. He watched California dismantle itself outside the window. The sprawl of the inland valleys, the commercial corridors with their identical signage, the sun-hammered subdivisions that spread out to the edges of everything and then stopped, replaced by something older and harder and less interested in human convenience. Then the land changed. Nevada came up dry and mineral pale, the sky bigger than it had any right to be, the distances between things suddenly meaningful in a way they never were in the city. Utah followed with its red geometry, its rock formations that looked like the bones of something enormous pushing through the skin of the earth after centuries of pressure. He slept with his head against the glass. He ate vending machine food at the rest stops. He did not speak to anyone. He had learned over 13 years of moving between homes that conversations on buses led to questions about where you were from and where you were going, and he never had satisfying answers to either. He thought in the spaces between fitful sleep about the 6 months he had spent with Silas Blackwood when he was 5 years old. The memories were fragmentary, more texture than narrative. Cold air and the smell of pine resin. The sound of something mechanical, rhythmic, a tool working against resistance. A wool blanket rough against his chin. A voice low and infrequent that did not talk down to him. He remembered thinking at 5 that the old man spoke to him like he was already someone, like he did not need to be explained to or managed or redirected. Like his presence in the room was simply a fact, and facts were something Silas Blackwood worked with rather than around. Then one morning there had been a social worker at the door and soft voices in another room, in a bag being packed, in a car ride, in a new house with a new family who called him Buddy, and smelled like laundry detergent and good intentions. He had understood over the years that the words surrendered meant the old man had chosen to let him go, that the paperwork said voluntary, that there had been no legal compulsion, no court order, no external force, only a decision made by a grown man about a small child who had no say in it. He had built his understanding of himself in part on that foundation. He was the boy who had been let go on purpose. It gave him a particular kind of hardness, not aggressive, just dense, load-bearing, the kind of interior architecture that holds everything else up by refusing to flex. He would find out in 2 days that the foundation was wrong. Wyoming arrived the way Wyoming always does, without announcement, the landscape simply becoming itself. The hills rolled out brown and sage-dusted under a sky the color of old pewter. The wind moved through the grass in long, slow pulses. There was a beauty to it that was entirely indifferent to being observed, a beauty that had been there long enough to stop performing itself for anyone who passed through. Covenant was smaller than he had expected. A main street of two-story brick buildings, most of them original and unrestored, their facades bearing the specific dignity of things that have stood long enough to stop caring about appearances. A diner with a hand-lettered sign. A hardware store with tools arranged in the window. A bar called the Rimrock with a neon sign that buzzed faintly in the dusk. The bus depot was attached to a gas station at the south end of the street, a single room with plastic chairs and a rack of tourist brochures for places 40 miles in every direction. The woman behind the counter pointed him toward the lockboxes on the wall without being asked. He must have had the look of someone who had come from somewhere far away to pick something up. He found the box, turned the dial. 0814, August 14th. Inside was a key. It was not what he expected. He had anticipated something functional, something modern, a padlock key or a door key of ordinary manufacture. This was neither. It was iron-heavy for its size, with a head worked into an intricate pattern, almost decorative. A key that belonged to old buildings, to locks, made in a time when the mechanism itself was considered worth making well. You would not throw a key like this away. You would keep it and wonder about it and feel its weight in your palm as a question. There was no note, no instructions, just the key cold in his palm. He asked the woman at the counter about transportation out to the property. She looked at him with the mild curiosity that small towns reserve for people arriving alone with duffel bags and no clear plan. Garrett Osley, she said, might take you. He's usually at the Rimrock by this hour. He found Osley at the far end of the bar, a broad man in a canvas jacket with the kind of hands that had done physical work for decades, blunt-fingered and scarred at the knuckles, in the specific pattern that comes from working with metal and machinery. He looked Cole over with the frank assessment of someone who had learned to read people the way you read weather quickly from surface signs without sentiment. "You're the Blackwood kid," Osley said. It was not a question. Cole told him he needed a ride out to the property. Osley drank from his beer and set it down carefully. 20 miles of bad road, $50. Cole paid it. The truck was a heavy-duty Ford, 15 years old, and maintained with the kind of attention working men in remote places give to the tools they depend on, absolutely. The cab smelled of diesel and sawdust, and the particular warmth of a machine that runs every day in all weather. Osley drove without conversation for the first 10 miles, which Cole appreciated. "Strange one, your grandfather," Osley said eventually. "Kept to himself like a religion. I used to drop supplies at the gate for him couple times a year. He never came out while I was there. Just left a list on the post the night before, and the payment in an envelope. Never short by $1, not once in all those years." Cole said nothing. "You planning on staying out there?" Osley asked. "Don't know yet." Osley made a sound that was neither approval nor disapproval. The road had gone from asphalt to packed gravel to two-track dirt, the truck's headlights cutting through the dark in a long yellow cone that showed nothing on either side but sage and sky. Then the truck slowed and Osley pointed. "There she is." In the headlights on the slight rise of land, the Quonset hut. A perfect half-cylinder of corrugated steel approximately 40 feet long, sitting on a concrete pad. No windows on the visible face, no lights, No landscaping, no infrastructure visible from the road. It looked exactly like what it was listed as in the county records. An outbuilding, a structure of zero distinction, the kind of thing you drive past without registering. "This is as far as I go," Osley said. Cole got out with his bag. The cold hit him immediately, not just temperature, but altitude and openness, the cold of a place where the wind has nothing to interrupt it for 50 miles. The air was so clear it felt sharp in the lungs. Above him, the sky was packed with stars in a density he had never seen from California. The Milky Way, a structural presence, not an abstraction, but a physical fact, stretched across the dark. He paid Osley. The man took the money but held a moment looking at Cole across the cab. "Key fits the padlock on the door," he said. "There's wood inside for the stove. Silas always kept it stocked. You get into trouble, you walk east. You'll hit the highway in about 4 miles. Cole nodded. Osley shifted into reverse and back down the track, his taillights diminishing until they were 2 small red points, and then nothing at all. Cole stood in the absolute dark for a moment listening. Wind, grass, the vast tidal sound of a landscape breathing. He stood there long enough to understand that the silence was not empty. It was full of things that had been there before him and would be there after him, things that did not require his presence to continue. It was a kind of silence he had not encountered before. Not the silence of a room where no one was speaking, but the silence of a place that had never needed speech. He picked up his bag and walked up the rise. The padlock on the door was heavy-duty, far more substantial than the door it secured. The iron key slid into it without resistance and turned with a precision that surprised him, clean and certain, as if it had been maintained recently. The door groaned on its hinges. He stepped inside. The interior hit him with cold air that smelled of dust and old wood smoke, and something underneath faint like machine oil and concrete. He found the flashlight in his bag and swept the beam around. A single long space, the curved walls forming the ceiling and sides without distinction. To his left, a cast-iron wood stove with a neat stack of split firewood beside it. To his right, a cot with a folded wool blanket. In the center, a heavy wooden table and a single straight-back chair. Along the far wall, floor-to-ceiling metal shelving loaded with military-style ammunition cans, each labeled in small, precise handwriting. Rice, beans, water purification, first aid, generator fuel, spare parts. In the corner, a steel welding table covered in tools and metal scraps. Against the back wall, a door that appeared to lead to a small bathroom. That was all. He stood in the middle of it and let the reality settle. This was his inheritance. A metal shed in Wyoming with $40 worth of canned goods and a cot. The state of California had given him $200 and a bus ticket. His grandfather had given him this. $10,000 was sitting on a table somewhere in an office in Cheyenne, waiting for his signature. He crossed to the cot and sat down. The wool blanket was rough under his hand, exactly as he remembered it from 13 years ago, which was impossible because it could not be the same blanket. But the texture was identical, the same deliberate coarseness. For a moment, the distance between 5 years old and 18 collapsed, and he was just a small person in a cold, unfamiliar place, being asked to make sense of something larger than him. It was a feeling he recognized. He had felt it in the first hours of every new placement, the particular vertigo of a world that had rearranged itself without asking permission. He stood and swept the flashlight beam around again, slower this time, looking at things rather than past them. He had learned to do this in every new house, in every new room. You did not understand a space by glancing at it. You looked at it in sections methodically until you knew where everything was and what it meant. The welding table caught his eye differently on the second pass. Heavy steel bolted to the floor, covered in what appeared to be years of workshop debris. But the debris was distributed too evenly, too arranged, like set dressing rather than genuine accumulation. He walked to it and began clearing the surface. Wrenches and gear segments and metal offcuts. Under everything, a flat steel surface with a faint rectangular outline, and on the rear left leg, a single large hexagonal bolt head painted the same gray as the leg. You would not notice it if you were not looking for it. He had been looking at everything. That was enough. The footlocker was under the cot. He had seen it on the first pass and dismissed it as standard storage. Now he pulled it out. Military surplus, dark green heavy. On the front panel, stenciled in the same small, precise lettering as the shelving labels, Cole. He lifted the lid. On top, a sealed envelope, his name on the front in that forward-leaning handwriting. Beneath it, a set of blueprints rolled and tied with twine. Beneath those tools, a heavy-duty wrench set, a crowbar, a socket set in a molded case. He set aside the blueprints and tools and picked up the envelope. His hands were steady. This surprised him because the steadiness was not the steadiness of calm. It was the steadiness of someone holding something that they understood on some level below language was going to change everything. The kind of steadiness that comes not from having nothing to fear, but from deciding that fear is not useful right now. He opened it. The letter inside was 4 pages handwritten on old cream-colored paper, the same small, precise script he had been looking at all day. Cole, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am not good with words. I am better with engines and concrete and things that hold their shape under pressure. But I will try. I expect you have questions. I expect you may hate me. You have every right. They told you I abandoned you. I made sure they would tell you that. It was the safest story for you to carry. Your mother, Eleanor, was a good person. She was also a brave one, which in the wrong circumstances amounts to the same thing as being in danger. The man who fathered you, Dwight Vance, worked as an internal accountant for a company called Westward Horizons and its parent entities. He kept records, detailed records, specific records of things that his employers needed to remain unrecorded. Dwight died in 2010. An accident officially. I know what it was. Your mother took his records and tried to do something with them. She came to me first because I was the only person she trusted who was old enough and stubborn enough and had little enough left to lose. We were trying to find the right path when she died. October 2011. Another accident. You were 5 years old. I took you in because there was no one else and because you were hers. I kept you for 6 months while I figured out what to do. But they found us, not the police, the people who employ the police. A man named Marcus Thorne. He runs Westward Horizons. He is the reason your parents are dead and the reason I had to make the hardest decision of my life. I made a deal. I gave Thorne everything I had. My savings, my property in California, everything liquid I could convert. In exchange, he agreed to leave you alone. But the condition was that I disappear. And you had to disappear in a way that could not be traced back to me. The state system was the only answer. It is the last place men like Thorne look for the grandchildren of men like me. You became a ward of the state of California, and I became a ghost. I came to this land. I bought it because I knew what was under it, which I will explain in time. And I built. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that I chose your life over my right to be in it. Every year I was away from you was a year I chose on purpose. Not because I stopped loving you, because I never stopped. There is more. The blueprints will begin to explain it. But first, go to the welding table. Find the hexagonal bolt on the rear left leg. Use the 3/4 inch socket. Turn it counterclockwise. Come see what I built for you. Cole sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. The wind moved against the metal walls, a low, resonant pressure, not quite sound, but present. The flashlight beam held steady on the page. He read the letter again, then a third time. The architecture of his life, the story he had built himself out of the fundamental fact of having been let go on purpose, of having been a voluntary surrender, sat in the center of his chest like a stone he had been carrying so long he had stopped noticing its weight. It had become structural. He had built everything else around it. And now someone was telling him the stone was not what he had thought it was. He did not know how to feel about that yet. The information was too large to process all at once. It required the kind of time that a cold Tuesday night in a Wyoming metal shed did not provide. So he set the feeling aside and did what he had always done. He focused on the next immediate thing. He found the 3/4-inch socket in the molded case and went to the welding table. He found the bolt. He fitted the socket over it and applied pressure. It resisted at first, genuinely the resistance of something that had been set and left and was not expecting to be moved. He leaned his weight into it and turned counterclockwise. The bolt moved. One revolution. Two. Then a pause, and from beneath the floor, a low hydraulic hiss that was startling in the stillness. The concrete slab directly beneath the table, a section he had not perceived as distinct from the surrounding floor, began to descend. Not to hinge or swing, but to lower evenly, the table going with it, the whole assembly dropping at the measured pace of something engineered to be controlled and quiet. A rectangular opening appeared in the floor 3 feet by 6, the edges machined clean. A staircase descended into the dark. The air that rose from the opening was different from the air in the hut. It was dry and temperature-controlled and carried a faint, clean, slightly electric quality. The air of a place that had systems, that had been designed by someone who understood the difference between a space that kept a person alive and a space that was built for a person to live in. Cole stood at the edge. He could take the $10,000. He could call Ren Albright in the morning and say the decision was easy. He could be in California by the end of the week with $10,000 and no particular plan, but at least some distance, some starting point, something. He picked up the flashlight. He went down. The stairs were steel, narrow, steep, ringing under his boots. At the bottom, a short corridor of smooth poured concrete, a single heavy door at the far end. Submarine style, a central wheel handle surrounded by locking lugs built to hold against pressure. The mechanism engaged with a series of deliberate clunks when he turned the wheel and then released, and the door swung inward. What he walked into was not what the letter had prepared him for, and the letter had tried. The space was the same footprint as the Quonset hut, above the same curving wall profile, but it had been lined and finished into something entirely different. Pale wood paneling on the curved walls, warm under indirect lighting that ran along the ceiling in a continuous strip. Gray carpet underfoot, dense and sound-absorbing. The air was warm and dry and carried the faint green scent of something living. On one side, a compact kitchen, electric range, a refrigerator, humming at low-volume sink, with a real faucet, cabinets built from the same pale wood as the walls. On the other side, a sitting area, a couch, a bookshelf running the full length of the wall loaded with paperbacks and technical manuals and binders in different colors, a desk with a lamp and a chair. At the far end, a bed properly made with a thick comforter, 2 pillows, an additional wool blanket folded at the foot. It was a home, not an approximation of one. Not a space adapted to serve as one out of necessity. A home designed and built from the beginning to be lived in. Every dimension considered. Every material chosen for how it would feel to a person spending their days inside it. The shelving at a height that did not require reaching. The lighting angled to avoid glare. The carpet laid in sections that could be replaced individually. Cole walked through it slowly. He ran his hand along the kitchen counter. Smooth laminate, no chips. He opened the refrigerator, empty but cold, running on its own power patient. He pressed his palm against the carpet and felt it give properly. He turned a full circle in the center of the room. 13 years. The man had spent 13 years making this. He got to the desk last. On it, a lamp he had not yet turned on, a small frame photograph face down, and an envelope propped against the lamp, his name on the front. He turned the photograph over first. Black and white, slightly grainy, developed without commercial equipment. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, dark-haired with a wide smile that had nothing performed about it. She was holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket, and the way her whole body angled toward it, protective, and certain, said something about the relationship between her and the baby that did not need a caption. On the back, in Silas's handwriting, Eleanor B. May 10th, 1982. D. October 4th, 2011. And below that, you at 4 months. Cole set the photograph down on the desk with great care, as if it could be damaged by the wrong kind of handling. He had never seen a picture of his mother holding him. He had never seen a picture of his mother at all, except a school photo in a file years old. A teenager with a guarded expression. This was different. This was her being happy. This was her being someone's mother. Someone's whole world held in two hands like something she intended to keep. He sat down in the desk chair. He opened the second letter. Cole, if you've made it here, you passed the first test. You chose to know. That is not as common as people think. This is your home now. The power is geothermal. I drilled for it in 2014, and it has been stable since. The water is from a deep aquifer, triple filtered, tested quarterly. The air is circulated and scrubbed. The systems are documented in the blue binders on the shelf, built to be maintained by one person with basic mechanical aptitude and the willingness to learn. I lived here for the last 13 years. The hut above was for appearances, a place for the county inspector, a place for Garrett Osley to drop supplies without knowing what he was supplying. Nobody ever looked further than the hut. Nobody ever had reason to. What I built here is yours completely, but there is still a decision to be made. The vault is through the door at the far end of the next module. What is in that vault will make the decision plain. What is in that vault is everything I spent 13 years building toward. There is money in it, enough for you to go anywhere. Be anyone, leave this behind entirely, and build a life that has no connection to any of this. That choice is real and it is honorable, and I will not think less of you for making it. But there is something else in it too, and the something else is why I brought you here. Sleep first. The decision has waited 13 years. It will wait one more night. Below the signature, a single additional line. The combination to the vault is your mother's birthday and your own. 8 digits. May 10th, 1982. August 14th, 2006. I expect you will know what to do with that. Cole set the letter down. He looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman in it was someone he had not known and had always been trying to find without knowing the name of what he was looking for. She had his coloring, or he had hers. The same line of the jaw, the same stillness in the eyes even while the rest of the face was open and warm. He thought about a man building a room for a boy he could not be near. Choosing the carpet, getting the lighting right, making sure the shelves were stocked with enough books that a person would not run out of something to read during a long winter underground. Running geothermal lines because he did not want the boy to come home to a cold place. The stone in the center of his chest was still there. It had not gotten lighter, but it had changed what it meant. He was not the boy who had been let go on purpose. He was the boy who had been hidden on purpose by someone who had nothing left to give except the act of hiding him, who had paid for that act with 13 years in a hole in the ground alone and had considered it a reasonable price. He stood and went to the kitchen and ran water from the tap into his cupped hands and drank. Cold, clean, the purest water he had ever tasted, with none of the mineral flatness of city water or the chemical edge of treated supplies. He turned off the light above the sink and stood in the soft glow of the ceiling strips and looked around at the room Silas Blackwood had built for him with his own hands over 13 years. Tomorrow he would open the vault. Tonight he lay down on the bed for the first time in his adult life in a room that was his. The wool blanket at the foot had the same texture he remembered from being 5 years old, the same deliberate roughness, and he did not try to determine whether it was the same blanket or simply the same considered choice made twice by the same person. He lay on his back and looked at the curving ceiling and listened to the air circulators, a low and steady hum, the sound of a system doing exactly what it was built to do. For the first time in 13 years, he could not identify a single thing in his immediate environment that was trying to be something other than what it was. The lights dimmed on a timer. Outside, Wyoming continued in its enormous indifference. The wind moved across 40 acres of land that held more beneath it than anyone standing on its surface would ever guess. The stars turned. The temperature dropped further, the clean, dry cold of a high-altitude winter night. Cole Vance, who had never had a home, slept in one. He woke before the lights came up. The ceiling timer had the room at low amber when he opened his eyes, a warmth that suggested dawn without fully committing to it. He lay still for a moment, doing what he had learned to do in every new place, cataloging the sounds and the quality of the air and the specific character of the silence before deciding what kind of morning it was going to be. Air circulators, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere in the structure, the barely perceptible vibration of something mechanical running as it was designed to run. That was all. No voices through walls that belonged to other people. No institutional clocks measuring out the day in equal portions. No footsteps in a hallway outside a door that did not lock from the inside. He sat up. The photograph of his mother was on the desk where he had left it. He did not look at it directly, but was aware of it the way you are aware of a source of heat in a cold room. Something that registers at the edge of attention without requiring your full focus. He made coffee from a sealed canister he found in a cabinet using a small electric percolator that had been cleaned and left ready. The coffee was dark and slightly bitter and was the best thing he had tasted in 3 days. He sat at the kitchen counter and drank it and read through the blue technical binder labeled Systems Overview while the lighting strips gradually brightened to something that approximated a Wyoming morning. He spent an hour reading before he allowed himself to think about the vault. The binder was thorough in the way that revealed a particular cast of mind. Silas had documented everything. The geothermal system, the heat exchanger maintenance schedule, the seasonal adjustment protocols, the water filtration array with a separate section on testing frequency and acceptable mineral profiles, the air circulation and scrubbing system which used HEPA filtration and a carbon exchange unit that needed its media replaced every 18 months. The electrical systems, the backup battery banks, the load calculations for adding or removing draws from the grid. Every page was written in the same economical hand, detailed without being dense, precise without being cold. It was the writing of a man who had thought carefully about what a single person working alone would need to know and had tried to give them exactly that and nothing more. Not the writing of someone who wanted to impress. The writing of someone who wanted to be useful. Cole recognized in it a particular kind of intelligence, not the intelligence of accumulation of knowing many things, the intelligence of reduction of knowing what mattered and discarding what did not. He put the binder back and rinsed his cup. He went to find the vault. The door to the third module was at the far end of the habitation space, a standard interior door that looked deliberately unremarkable. Behind it, a short connecting corridor, and then another submarine-style door identical to the one at the base of the stairs. When he opened it, warm, humid air moved over him and he stopped in the doorway. The smell of green things, earth, the particular richness of soil that had organisms in it doing their invisible labor. He had not encountered a smell like it since a school trip to a botanical garden when he was 9, and even then it had been through glass observed rather than entered. He stepped inside. The hydroponics module was the same Quonset footprint as the others, but felt entirely different. The curved walls were lined with wire shelving, tier on tier, and on every tier trays of growth medium supporting plants at various stages of development. Lettuce in a dozen varieties, some heading, some still loose and reaching upward. Tomato plants staked and trained along wire guides, small green fruits clustering at the nodes. Peppers, 3 or 4 kinds, their fruit beginning to color. Herbs along the lower shelves, dense and fragrant. Swiss chard with stems the color of traffic signals. Beans climbing a lattice that ran the full length of one wall. Above everything, full spectrum grow lights in long horizontal banks, their warm white glow giving the room the quality of a perpetual afternoon. The system ran from a central control panel mounted near the door. Pumps, timers, nutrient dosing, humidity management, all of it automated, all of it running. The last manual adjustment was logged 11 weeks ago. The system had been running itself since then, without intervention, and the plants were thriving. 13 years, Cole thought. He built this and lived inside it, intended it and ate from it, and maintained the systems and never told a single person any of it existed. He walked slowly through the rows. At the far end, another door, and beside it on the floor, wire crates of preserved goods in glass jars. Hundreds of them. Pickled vegetables, pressure canned fruits, dried beans and grains. The stores of a man who had thought carefully about time, about the distance between what you have now and what you will need. He went back up to the Quonset hut. The vault entrance was where the blueprint said it would be. The shelving unit along the east wall loaded with ammunition cans labeled spare parts. He found the empty can on the third shelf and opened it. The lever inside was a simple bar handle worn smooth at the grip. He pulled it. A soft click. The entire shelving unit shifted forward by half an inch. He pushed and it swung outward on hidden casters with the easy precision of something built by a man who understood tolerances, who knew that a mechanism you had to fight was a mechanism that would eventually fail. Behind it, the curved wall of the hut had been replaced by a flat steel plate. In the center, a combination lock. Milled steel, heavy institutional quality. 8 digits. His mother's birthday and his own. 51000814. He spun the dial through the sequence. Each correct position engaged with a small internal confirmation. On the final number, a deliberate and irrevocable thud from somewhere inside the mechanism, and the handle disengaged. He pulled the door open. The air inside was cold and dry, maintained at a temperature designed to preserve paper and electronics. The space was the same footprint as the others, but felt smaller because of how it was furnished. One wall lined with filing cabinets floor to ceiling, each drawer labeled in Silas's hand. Soil samples with date and GPS coordinates. Water table readings quarterly spanning 11 years. Corporate filings for Westward Horizons, and 12 subsidiary names listed on a separate index card tacked to the face of one drawer. Shell company records, financial analysis, aerial and ground-level photographs of sites he could not yet identify. Against the opposite wall, steel shelving loaded with hard-sided cases, black identicals stacked 4 high and 2 deep. He opened the nearest one. Cash. Vacuum-sealed bricks of $100 bills arranged with the same methodical care as everything else Silas Blackwood had built or stored or documented. He opened a second case, a third, all the same. He did not count it. He could not have counted it with any accuracy. He closed the cases and stepped back. On the heavy steel work table in the center of the room, a laptop computer closed plugged into a power strip, a leather-bound ledger beside it thick its spine worn, and next to the ledger, a small digital voice recorder with a strip of masking tape on its face. The tape read, in the familiar handwriting, "Play me." He picked up the recorder and pressed play. The voice that came from the small speaker was low and deliberate and unhurried, slightly roughened by age and by the particular quality of a voice that had spoken mostly to itself for many years. It carried the cadence of a man who had decided what he wanted to say and was going to say it in the order he had chosen, without detour, without performance. "Cole," the voice said, "if you are hearing this, you found the vault, which means you read the letters, which means you know most of what I need you to know. But there are things I could not put on paper, and those are what I am going to tell you now. Your father's name was Dwight Vance. He was not a bad man, not fundamentally. He was a man who made a practical choice and discovered too late that what he had chosen to look away from was larger than he had understood. He kept records because he was an accountant, and keeping records was what he knew. I believe in the end he kept them also because some part of him understood that what he was involved in needed to be witnessed somewhere, even if only in columns of numbers on paper that no one else would ever read. Marcus Thorne owns Westward Horizons. What Westward Horizons does officially is acquire and develop remote land parcels for resort and residential projects. What it actually does, and has done for over 2 decades, is operate as a disposal service for industrial waste that cannot be handled through legal channels. Chemical manufacturing byproducts, petroleum refining residue, agricultural runoff concentrates from operations that would face federal penalties for standard disposal. Thorne's network purchases remote land through a rotating series of shell corporations, uses each parcel as a burial site, and moves on. The shells are dissolved after each transaction. The chain of ownership is designed to be impenetrable. Your father documented all of it, not as an act of courage, at least not initially, as professional habit. Then something shifted in him. He started making copies. He made them in a way that suggested he intended someone eventually to read them. A pause in the recording. Cole could hear his grandfather breathing slow and controlled. They killed him before he could do anything with the copies. Your mother found them in his belongings and understood immediately what they were. She brought them to me because I was the only person in her life old enough and stubborn enough to not be frightened into silence. We were 3 weeks from getting the documentation to a federal prosecutor your mother had identified as clean a man with no relationship to Thorne's network. Then she died. I went to ground. I brought everything here. I spent the next 13 years building what you see and building the case that the ledger and those filing cabinets represent. The evidence is complete. Soil samples from 11 burial sites, including 3 on this property, showing contamination profiles that match the industrial sources documented in your father's records. Water table data showing migration of those contaminants toward municipal supply aquifers. Satellite imagery showing land transformation at 6 additional sites. Corporate records tracing the Shell Company network to Thorne's personal holding entities. Financial records showing the fee structures Thorne charged his industrial clients for the service of making their waste disappear. It is everything a prosecutor needs. It has been everything a prosecutor needs for at least 4 years. I could not take it forward myself because I am officially a dead man, and because Thorne has resources I do not. To bring this case forward, you need someone who can operate in the legal world, who has standing, who has personal motivation sufficient to match the risk. There is a woman named Wren Albright. She is my attorney of record for the estate, which is how you know her name. But that is not all she is. Her father, Eldon Albright, was an assistant attorney general for the state of Wyoming in 2007. He began investigating a series of land acquisitions in Fremont and Natrona counties that matched the signature of Thorne's operation. In 2008, Thorne had him removed, fabricated a financial misconduct case, used his connections in the state judiciary to ensure it went nowhere defensible. Eldon Albright resigned, was never formally cleared, and died in 2015 with his reputation destroyed and his work unfinished. Wren Albright went to law school 2 years after her father's resignation. I know why she went. She does not know that I know. She does not know about this place or this evidence or the connection between her father's investigation and what is documented in those cabinets. When you tell her, she will understand immediately what she is looking at. She is not a tool for you to use. She is a person with her own obligation to this as real as yours. Approach her as an equal. Another pause. Longer. In the cases against the wall, there is enough money to give you a life, Cole. A real one built on your own terms without any of this weight. I built that option deliberately because I had no right to draft you into a war that is not technically yours. But your parents are dead because of Marcus Thorne. And 40,000 people in this county and the ones adjacent to it are drinking water that is being quietly poisoned by what he buried under this land and land like it. Those are facts that exist whether or not you choose to act on them. I have given you the battlefield. I have given you everything I know. What you do with it is yours alone. One more thing. Do not try to crack the encrypted partition on the laptop by yourself. The password is in the blue binder, the Systems Overview, page 47, the footnote. It looks like a maintenance specification. It is the key to everything on that drive that I could not put in the physical files. Take care of the plants. They have been running themselves for a while and the basal needs thinning. His voice stopped. The recorder ran for a few more seconds of silence and clicked off. Cole set it down on the table. He stood in the cold, dry air of the vault for a long time, looking at the filing cabinets, the cases of money, the closed laptop. The Wyoming morning was doing whatever Wyoming mornings did above him, indifferent and enormous and cold. He thought about 40,000 people. He thought about his mother at 29 years old, standing in a dead man's apartment, holding a ledger, deciding what to do with it. He thought about Silas Blackwood spending 13 years in a hole in the ground, building a case that he could not close himself, waiting for the heir who might or might not show up, and might or might not choose to do anything with what he found. He went upstairs and found page 47 of the Systems Overview binder. The footnote was at the bottom of a page describing water filtration maintenance. It read, filter media replacement frequency contingent on source T, DS readings. Baseline parameter 2714-AW-0510-0814 established from initial aquifer testing adjust per quarterly log. It looked exactly like a technical specification. Nothing more. He took the binder down to the vault, opened the laptop, and entered the string. The encrypted partition opened. He did not read everything that day. There was too much. But he read enough to understand the architecture of what Silas had built. The digital files were the master index for the physical evidence, cross-referenced and annotated with the precision of a man who understood that evidence without context is just information, and that context was what transformed information into proof. He called Wren Albright at noon. Her voice was the same as it had been at the bus station payphone. Efficient, carrying the mild patience of someone who expected this call to concern a straightforward decision. He told her he was not selling the property. She began the response she had clearly prepared, the one about deadlines and back taxes and county seizure timelines. He let her finish. Then he said, "I've been inside the property, Ms. Albright, all of it. I know what my grandfather built here, and I know what he built it for. I know about Westward Horizons. I know about Marcus Thorne. And I know about your father." The silence that followed was different from her professional pauses. It was not the silence of someone choosing words. It was the silence of someone who had stopped breathing. "What did you say?" she said. "I have the evidence. All of it. 13 years of documentation, physical samples, financial records, corporate filings tracing Thorne's network to 11 disposal sites across 6 states, a ledger kept by my father, and digital files on an encrypted drive that cross-reference everything. Your father's investigation in 2007 was correct. Everything he suspected was real. I have the records that prove it." She made a sound he could not categorize. Not quite a breath and not quite a word. "I'm not calling to ask for help," he said. "I'm calling because my grandfather's notes say you've been waiting for this. I think we both have something the other needs. I think we should talk in person." "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said, and the professional cadence was entirely gone from her voice. Something rawer was underneath it, older, the voice of a person who had been holding something at a careful distance for a very long time and had just felt it move closer. She arrived at 9 the next morning in a dark blue Subaru that had seen considerable Wyoming winter. She was younger than her phone voice suggested, somewhere in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that evaluated the Quonset hut with the quick attention of someone assessing a situation before committing to it. She noticed the blackened, fire-damaged section of the eastern wall immediately. "What happened there?" she said. He told her. The 2 figures on the camera, the fire they had set 3 weeks earlier before walking back down the track. She looked at the damage for a moment, then at him. "Show me what you found," she said. He showed her everything. He watched her face as she descended the stairs for the first time, as she stood in the warm light of the habitation module and processed what she was looking at. The professional composure she wore as naturally as clothing slipped briefly, and what replaced it was something unguarded. In the hydroponics module, she stopped at a row of tomato plants and stood there without speaking for nearly a minute. In the vault, she opened the filing cabinets one by one, reading labels, pulling drawers, handling documents with the attention of someone who understood their legal weight precisely. She spent 40 minutes with the ledger, sitting at the work table with her coat still on, turning pages slowly and making notes on a legal pad she had brought from her car. When she finally looked up, her face had settled into something that was not calm, but had the quality of a decision being made and held. "My father spent 2 years on this," she said, "before they took it from him." She set the ledger down carefully. "He had 3 of Thorne's shell companies documented. Your grandfather has 12. Cole said nothing. "The disposal site data alone." She continued, moving to the filing cabinets, running her hand along the drawer fronts. "If the financial records establish Thorne's direct personal benefit rather than just corporate liability, this goes far beyond regulatory fines." She stopped and looked at him. "How long have you been down here working on this?" 3 weeks, he said. "You cracked the encrypted partition yourself. It was not that complicated once I found the key. She studied him with the particular attention of someone recalibrating an assessment made too quickly. Your grandfather's notes about me, she said. What exactly did they say? That your father's investigation was real and correct and was destroyed by Thorne's interference. That you went to law school for a reason. That you should be approached as an equal. She was quiet for a moment. He was more perceptive than I gave him credit for, she said. I only met him twice. He seemed like a man who said very little and watched everything. That's accurate, Cole said. She opened her legal pad to the first clean page. Here is how we do this, she said. The evidence is comprehensive, but the way we introduce it determines whether it holds. If we go directly to federal authorities, Thorne has enough influence to slow the process, while his attorneys challenge chain of custody on everything collected unilaterally. We go first to journalists with the physical evidence simultaneously, to the EPA with the environmental data, and to one state-level prosecutor I know personally who I believe is clean. All three tracks at the same time. The public record gets established before anyone can move to suppress it. How long to prepare the packages, Cole asked. 6 weeks, she said, to do it properly. He nodded. While you handle the legal architecture, he said, I'm going through everything on the drive. There's documentation I haven't fully mapped yet. I want to know every detail before we commit to any approach. She looked at him. You understand that once we send this, we cannot control what Thorne does in response. I understand he already knows I'm here, Cole said. He's already sent people to look at this place, and they found nothing. He's going to keep escalating until either he gets what he wants or we make escalating too expensive for him to continue. She held his gaze for a moment. You're 18 years old, she said. Not as a challenge. As a fact, she was still incorporating. I've had a longer education than most 18-year-olds, he said. She almost smiled. Then she settled into the work. They spent 6 weeks preparing. She drove out twice a week, sometimes 3 times, as the preparation reached its more complex stages. She brought legal reference materials and office supplies and occasionally food from the Covenant Diner still warm when it arrived. He provided the workspace, the documentation, and the technical analysis on the digital files. The collaboration established its own rhythm quickly. She was the architect of the legal strategy understanding evidentiary standards and procedural landscape. He was the one who knew the physical evidence, who had spent weeks inside the filing cabinets, and the encrypted drive, who could answer specific questions about where a particular document sat in the larger structure of what Silas had built. They did not become close exactly. They became effective, which was its own kind of relationship built on mutual recognition of competence rather than personal history. Over those weeks, Cole learned the full depth of what the encrypted partition contained. His grandfather had done more than collect evidence. He had modeled the entire scheme, tracing money flows from industrial clients through Thorne's billing entities into the shell corporations, and from there into Thorne's personal holding structures. The model was built on financial filings Silas had obtained through public records requests made under assumed names, combined with documents Dwight Vance had copied before his death. The cross-referencing work was painstaking. Cole developed a methodology that tied specific disposal transactions to specific sites through the physical samples, which was the connective tissue the prosecution package needed. He worked 12-hour days and sometimes longer surfacing to tend the hydroponic system, check the generators, eat whatever was in the refrigerator. Westward Horizons continued its pressure. 2 more certified letters arrived at the Covenant Post Office citing environmental liability concerns and requesting access for independent inspection. Wren handled each response technically accurate and entirely uninformative. A man appeared on the county road in the 4th week, parked at the fence line, watching the Quonset hut through binoculars for nearly 2 hours before leaving. Cole noted the vehicle and time in a log he had started keeping. In the 5th week, the letter stopped and the character of the pressure changed. He was in the habitation module at 11 at night when the motion alert triggered on his laptop. 2 figures on the perimeter camera moving up the access track on foot. Dark clothing. The particular quiet of people who had done this kind of thing before. He watched them on the camera grid. They went to the hut. One stood watch while the other worked the new padlock he had installed. 4 minutes to breach. Inside, their flashlight beams moved across the floor, the shelving, the cot, the welding table. They lifted the ammo cans, checked under the cot, swept the beams along the walls. They found nothing. There was nothing to find. The hydraulic mechanism required the specific socket to activate, and the table had been relaid with authentic-looking debris. Then one of them produced a container and poured something along the base of the eastern wall and lit it. Cole watched the fire catch and spread the corrugated metal, blackening the concrete footing, scorching. The two figures walked back down the track and disappeared. He did not move until the perimeter camera confirmed they were gone. Then he went through the vault to the level 3 access tunnel his grandfather had built, which ran underground to a point 40 feet east of the hut, and climbed up through the ground access hatch and stood in the cold Wyoming night and watched the fire burn along the eastern face of the hut. The metal did not catch the way wood would have. It scorched and damaged, but did not consume. He stood outside until the fire burned itself out, then went back below. In the morning, he called Wren. She arrived 2 hours later and looked at the damage with an expression that was more resolved than alarmed. "This is his answer to the legal letter," she said. Cole said yes. "We are close enough to ready," she said. "Another week, maybe 10 days. Can you hold 10 days? He looked at the blackened wall and thought about his grandfather spending 13 years down here without anyone coming to check if he was all right. About what it required of a person to choose that day after day for years. "Yes," he said. Garrett Osley showed up that afternoon. He had seen the smoke from the highway and driven by in the morning. He stood at the base of the rise, looking at the scorched metal with the flat assessment of a man who read damage to structures and equipment the way others read text. He looked at Cole in the doorway. "You know what they were looking for," Osley said. Cole said yes. Osley put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Your grandfather didn't want any help," he said after a moment. "I offered a couple of times over the years. He always said he didn't need it. Seems like maybe you might. Not asking what it is, just saying if you need something done in town supplies, picked up anything that keeps you from having to show your face somewhere, you maybe don't want to." Cole looked at him for a moment. "There might be?" Cole said. "I'll let you know." Osley nodded, satisfied with the precision of that, and got back in his truck. Cole went below and back to work. 10 days later, the package was complete. 3 separate dossiers. One for the 2 journalists Wren had identified, one for the EPA regional office in Denver, one for the state-level prosecutor in Cheyenne that Wren trusted with the specific reasoned trust of someone who had spent 12 years learning to distinguish the clean from the compromised. The dossiers contained the core documentary evidence from Silas's files, the financial model Cole had built from the digital partition, 3 years of water table data showing contamination migration toward Covenant's municipal supply, and the ledger digitized and indexed. Wren had uncovered something else during the 6 weeks of preparation, a piece of the geological picture that Silas had documented but had not fully articulated in his letters. The soil contamination from 3 sites on the property was not isolated. The underlying geology showed the deposit sitting directly upstream from the main aquifer that supplied water to Covenant and 4 adjacent counties. 40,000 people. Thorne did not simply want the land to keep his secret buried. He wanted to control the cleanup that would eventually become unavoidable to turn the disaster he had created into a government remediation contract worth hundreds of millions. Cole had looked at the geological map for a long time when he understood this. He had looked out through the ventilation intake toward the direction of town where Garrett Osley went for coffee every morning without thinking about it, where the families who had lived there for generations turned on their taps without question. He had made the work go faster after that. They worked at the vault table on the final night, Wren cross-referencing the document checklist on her laptop, Cole loading the encrypted digital packages onto 3 separate drives. The vault was cold and lit with steady functional light and had the specific quality of a space where something long prepared was approaching its end. "Your father's name is in the documentation," Cole said, "in the section on the 2007 investigation. The records show he identified the right companies and the right methods before Thorne shut it down. That will be in the public record once this moves. She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes did not leave the screen. He deserved that, she said. It does not fix what happened to him, but he deserved to have been right on the record. Cole looked at the transmission interface. 3 recipient addresses, 3 upload queues all loaded. He hit send. The upload bars filled. 3 separate transmissions moving simultaneously through encrypted channels to 3 points in the world that Thorne's network did not as far as either of them could determine control. The screen showed 3 confirmations. Wren sat back in her chair and let out a long, controlled breath. Cole looked at the filing cabinets, the cases of money, the voice recorder sitting on the corner of the table where he had placed it on the first morning. He thought about the voice that had come from it, the particular weight of a man reaching across his own death to hand someone else the thing he could not finish alone. "Tomorrow it begins," Wren said. Cole said nothing. He was thinking about 40,000 people in water and a man who had spent 13 years in the ground making sure someone would eventually know about both. He turned off the vault light. The first story ran 48 hours after they sent the packages. It appeared on a Tuesday morning, published by an investigative journalist in Denver who had been covering environmental compliance failures in the Mountain West for 11 years. The language was careful, hedged in the way that responsible journalists hedge when they are carrying something large enough to destroy them professionally if they get it wrong. But the substance was present and specific. Shell corporations, disposal sites, a network of acquired parcels in 6 states, a CEO whose name had not appeared in print in connection with anything criminal until that morning. Cole read it on the laptop at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He read it 3 times. It was accurate. Every specific claim was supported by something in the dossier. His phone rang. "Wren, it's running," she said. "EPA Denver confirmed receipt of our package yesterday evening. The prosecutor's office in Cheyenne asked me 4 specific follow-up questions this morning. You only ask those questions if you're already taking something seriously." "How long before Thorne responds?" Cole said. "By end of day," she said. She was right about the timeline. By noon, Westward Horizons had issued a statement through a public relations firm in Chicago. The language was confident and dismissive, the language of a company that had survived scrutiny before and expected to survive it again. The documents cited in the reporting were characterized as fabricated, the product of a coordinated campaign by unnamed competitors. Marcus Thorne was described as a respected business leader with a decades-long record of responsible land development. The statement invited regulatory review and expressed full confidence in the outcome. Cole read the statement and felt the specific cold clarity of someone who had spent 6 weeks inside the documentation and knew with precision exactly how wrong every sentence of it was. The second journalist published that afternoon. Based in Washington, national audience, a different approach. Less hedged, more direct, the writing of someone who had reviewed the financial records with sufficient expertise to understand what they meant. The Shell Company network laid out in a diagram. 12 entities, the beneficial ownership structure pointing at every level to the same person. By evening, 3 more outlets had picked it up, each adding context from their own sources. Former Westward Horizons employees, environmental consultants who had worked in the affected regions, a retired EPA official who had noted irregularities in several of the relevant parcels years earlier and had been unable to build a case from what was publicly available at the time. The narrative Thorne had maintained through institutional connection and legal intimidation for more than 2 decades was not crumbling in a single moment. It was disaggregating piece by piece each new account, making the next one easier for someone to give. Cole's phone rang at 9 that night, a number he did not recognize. He answered. The voice on the other end was measured and unhurried, carrying the particular quality of a man who had spent decades being the person in the room who did not need to raise his voice to command it. "Mr. Vance," the voice said, "my name is Marcus Thorne. I think it's time we spoke directly." Cole said nothing. "I understand you have recently come into possession of certain materials that belong to your grandfather." Thorne continued. "Materials that have found their way into the hands of some journalists and regulatory bodies. I want you to understand that I do not hold you personally responsible. You are a young man who inherited a complicated situation. You have acted on documents provided by a man with his own grievances. That is understandable. Cole let him finish. I am prepared to resolve this cleanly, Thorne said. $10 million transferred to an account of your choosing in exchange for a public statement clarifying that the documents were misrepresented to you and that you have no basis for the claims currently attributed to the materials you provided. The journalists will walk back their stories. The regulatory inquiries will lose their evidentiary foundation. Everyone moves forward. Cole had thought about this moment for 2 weeks. He had thought about what it would feel like to hear the number spoken aloud. He had thought about whether the part of him that had grown up with nothing would have a response to $10 million being offered as if it were a routine business arrangement. It did not pull. It clarified. My grandfather turned down $10,000, Cole said. I'm going to turn down $10 million. I'd appreciate it if you didn't call this number again. He ended the call. He sat in the quiet of the habitation module for a while, hands flat on the table, listening to the air circulators. The plants in the next module were growing without him. The systems were running. Somewhere above him and 20 miles east, the town of Covenant was going about its evening, its residents drinking water from a municipal supply that had been receiving contamination migration for years. He went to bed. Thorne called again 3 days later. Cole let it ring 4 times before picking up, and when he did, the voice on the other end was different. The words were still composed and the syntax still professional, but underneath the composure was something that had not been there before. A hairline fracture in the surface of it. The sound of a controlled person encountering the first real evidence that control might have limits. I want to be direct with you, Thorne said. The initial offer was a courtesy. I am prepared to be significantly more generous. $25 million. A new identity, full documentation, a starting account in a jurisdiction of your choosing. You could go anywhere in the world. You could build a life that has nothing to do with Wyoming or any of this. Cole thought about his mother at 29 years old, standing in a dead man's apartment, holding a ledger in her hands, choosing what to do with it. 29 years old. Younger than Wren. Younger than anyone he could now imagine making the decisions she had made with such clarity and such cost. My grandfather built me a home, Cole said. My parents died because of what you did. My mother was 29 years old. He paused to let that sit. Don't call this number again. He ended the call. He sat at the table for a long time after that, his hands still, his breathing even. He sat with the weight of what he had just said and what it meant, not just as a refusal, but as a statement of where he stood and what he was made of. He sat with it until it settled into something he could carry without it altering his balance. Then he stood and went to the hydroponics module and spent an hour checking the systems, not because they needed checking, but because the work of tending living things was the most honest thing he knew how to do when everything else felt too large to hold. What followed was not a single dramatic event, but a sequence of institutional processes working at the pace that institutions actually work, which is slower and more grinding than any story makes it sound, and for that reason, more real. The EPA issued a public statement 8 days after the initial reporting, confirming the opening of an emergency environmental investigation into multiple land parcels in Fremont, Natrona, and Carbon counties in Wyoming, as well as sites in Colorado, Montana, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. The statement named Westward Horizons as a company of interest. The Wyoming Attorney General's office announced a grand jury convening 11 days after that. Wren called Cole to tell him, and her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it held carefully, the way you hold something that has been weighted for so long you are afraid of disturbing it. My father's files, she said. They are part of the public record now. The grand jury subpoena references the 2007 investigation as foundational to the current inquiry. They are treating it as the first documented attempt to expose the scheme. Cole said nothing for a moment. He was right, Cole said. The whole time he was right. She did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice had steadied. Yes, she said. Former Westward Horizons employees began speaking publicly in the second week after the initial story. Three of them, none coordinated with the others, each describing different aspects of the operation from the positions they had held. A site acquisition manager who described the shell company structure as standard procedure that no one questioned. A logistics coordinator who had arranged transportation for materials he had been told were inert fill. An environmental compliance officer who had raised internal concerns in 2009 and been dismissed 3 weeks later. Other landowners came forward. Two families in Colorado who had sold parcels to westward subsidiaries under pressure that had felt at the time like circumstances rather than coercion. A rancher in Montana who had noticed discoloration in a creek running through land adjacent to a former westward site and had been told by state regulators that testing showed nothing of concern which he had not believed and had been correct not to believe. Cole followed all of it from below ground, checking the news each morning before turning to the day's work, which had shifted from building the prosecution package to maintaining the property and continuing the documentation of the 3 on-site disposal areas. The EPA field team would need access eventually. He wanted the record complete when they arrived. He was in the hydroponics module tending the tomato plants on a Thursday morning when he heard the crunch of tires on the access track through the ventilation intake. He went to the surface camera monitor. Garrett Osley's truck. He climbed the stairs, crossed the hut, and stepped outside. Osley was standing at the base of the rise with a thermos in one hand, looking at the repaired section of the eastern wall where Cole had spent 2 days patching the fire damage with sheet metal ordered through Osley's contacts in Riverton. "Decent patch job," Osley said. "It's functional," Cole said. Osley held up the thermos. "Coffee. Made too much this morning." Cole came down the rise and accepted it. He poured a cup from the thermos cap and drank. It was good coffee, dark and properly made. They were quiet for a moment, both looking out at the land, the late morning light moving across the sage in long, slow patterns as the cloud cover shifted. Osley's truck radio had been playing low when Cole came out. He had turned it off before getting out, but Cole had caught enough of the broadcast to know what channel it was. "You heard," Cole said. Osley looked at the ground briefly, then at Cole. "Airport in Chicago," he said. "Yesterday evening. They picked him up at the gate. He had a flight to Zurich." Cole nodded. "2 passports on him," Osley continued. "Radio said neither was in his name." Cole drank his coffee. Osley was quiet for a moment longer. Then he set down his keys and extended his hand. Not the loose handshake of social formality. A real one offered once held for a moment released. The kind that meant one specific thing and required no elaboration. Cole shook it. Osley picked up his keys, got back in his truck, and drove down the access road without another word. Cole stood there for a while after the truck disappeared holding the thermos, looking out at 40 acres that had been waiting along with everything beneath it for someone to come and do something about what it contained. The land looked the same as it had when he arrived. The sage ran out to the fence line. The sky was enormous and pale and carried the specific emptiness of a Wyoming winter preparing to become something else. Nothing on the surface to indicate what was under it. Nothing to suggest that any of this was anything other than what it appeared to be. He went back inside. He found the locked drawer on a Saturday morning 5 weeks after Thorne's arrest. He had been systematically clearing and organizing the vault in preparation for the EPA's formal site access visit, which Wren had scheduled for the following month. Most of the physical files had been inventoried and documented for the legal record. The cases of money had been moved to a separate area, their contents subject to legal process that Wren was navigating. The drawer was in the base of the central work table, a section he had registered as storage without examining closely because the table's surface had occupied all his attention during the weeks of preparation work. The lock was a small keyed mechanism rather than a combination. He found the key on the same ring as the key to the hydroponics supply cabinet labeled in the familiar hand with a single letter J. He had no idea what J referred to. He opened the drawer. Inside was a single object, a journal bound in brown leather, the cover worn to softness from years of handling. No label on the outside. He lifted it and felt the weight of it, the density of pages written on consistently over a long period of time. He sat down at the table and opened it to the first page. The date at the top was January 2012. The handwriting was Silas's. Smaller than his other writing, more compressed, as if he had understood when he started that there would be a great deal to fit, and the space was finite. January 2012. Cole is 6 years old. He has been in the first placement for 3 weeks. The investigator's report says the family is adequate attentive without being warm. He says Cole is adjusting. I do not know what that means for a 6-year-old who has lost his mother and been handed to strangers by his grandfather. I suspect it means he is doing what he has to do. He is my daughter's son. He will do what he has to do. Cole sat with that for a moment. Then he turned the page. March 2012. The investigator saw him at school pickup, said he looks healthy, said he has a friend, a boy named Darren, who shares his table in the classroom. I wrote the name down. Darren. I do not know why I wrote it down. It seemed important to know that he had a friend named Darren. Cole turned more pages. The entries were not daily, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months, sometimes longer. Each one began with a date and Cole's age, and each one contained whatever the investigator had reported, followed by Silas's own response to the reported facts. Not narration, reaction. The private record of a man processing, in the only way available to him, information about a child he could not reach. August 2014, Cole is 8, third placement. The second ended because the family relocated. He did not initiate the disruption, and he did not, according to the investigator, seem surprised by it. This worries me more than if he had cried. A child who expects to be moved has learned something about the world that is very difficult to unlearn. I want to drive to California. I remind myself that I cannot. Not yet. Not safely. The word yet is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and I know it. Cole read slowly. The light in the vault was cold and steady. The air circulators ran their quiet cycles. November 2016. Cole is 10. He has been teaching himself mechanical repair from books he checks out of the school library. The investigator mentioned it in passing as a minor curiosity. I read that line 4 times. He finds his way to the things that make sense to him. That is Eleanor's mind. Her instinct for following what is real and useful rather than what is comfortable or convenient. I am glad. I am also aware of how complicated gladness is at this distance. April 2019. Cole is 13. He was in a fight at school. The report says he defended another student who was being bullied. He was suspended for 3 days. The foster family at the current placement made it a difficult week for him. I wish I could tell him that he did the right thing and the consequence was unjust. I have no way to tell him anything. I light the stove, and I sit here and I talk to the air sometimes, which I recognize is not a thing a sane person does. I do it anyway. Cole stopped on that page for a long time. He thought about a man sitting alone in an underground room talking to the air because there was no other available way to reach a 13-year-old boy in a suburb of Sacramento who had just served a 3-day suspension for protecting someone smaller than himself. September 2021. Cole is 15, 7th placement. I asked the investigator directly this time, is he all right? She said he is functional, which is the word people use when they mean that a person has learned to require nothing from the world and so cannot technically be said to be failing. I told her I needed more than functional. She said that was the best assessment available from the outside. I thanked her and paid her fee and sat here for 3 hours without doing anything productive. He is 15 and has been in 7 homes. I have been 1,100 miles away in a hole I dug myself, and I tell myself every year that it is protective, and every year I believe it a little less. Not because it is not true, because believing something true does not make it not cost what it costs. I will not contact him. Not yet. It is not safe yet. I am aware of how much the word yet is doing in that sentence. Cole's throat was tight. He turned to the last entry. September 2024. Cole will be 18 in 6 weeks. I have instructed Ren Albright to hold the estate notification until his birthday. Everything is ready. The systems are running well. The hydroponics need attention in the basal section. The vault documentation is complete. The encrypted partition has everything cross-referenced. I have been doing this for 13 years. I am tired in the way that a machine is tired when it has been running at high capacity for longer than its specified design load. Not broken, just at the limit. I do not know if he will come. I do not know if he will read the letters or turn down the money or choose to stay. I built all of this hoping he would, but hoping and knowing are different things, and I have been honest with myself about that from the beginning. He may look at a tin shed on 40 acres of Wyoming and see exactly what it appears to be. But I have watched him for 13 years. I have watched him move through 7 homes without losing whatever it is that he is made of. I have watched him teach himself things in libraries and defend other people's children and make decisions without anyone to consult. He is Eleanor's son. He is also, I allow myself to think, something that I had some part in, however far away. If you are reading this, Cole, then you came. And if you came, then you stayed long enough to find this, which means you already know what you chose to do, and I already know I was right to believe you would choose it. I am proud of you. Not for what you have done, though. I expect by now you have done something worth being proud of. I am proud of you for surviving the 13 years before any of this. That belonged entirely to you. Take care of the plants. The basil needs thinning. The entry ended there. Cole closed the journal. He sat at the table in the cold vault for a long time, the journal in his hands not moving. The air circulators ran. The lights held steady above him. Somewhere in the module above the refrigerator hummed. Beyond that, the grow lights in the hydroponics module sustained the plants Silas had started from seed and tended and left running on their automated schedules, still growing, still productive, still alive. He had thought he was alone. He had built himself around that fact the way you build around a structural wall, incorporating it into everything else, because everything else rested on it. The wall had never existed. He had never been alone. He had been watched imperfectly and at enormous distance by a man sitting in an underground room talking to the air, paying an investigator to report details that he wrote down in a brown leather journal because writing them down was the only thing he could do with them. Every placement, every year, every small fact about his life that a private investigator could observe from the outside and report back. Cole set the journal on the table and stood and went up through the complex and out of the hut and into the Wyoming afternoon. The season had changed while he was underground. It was spring now. Spring in Wyoming does not ease in gradually. It arrives abruptly with cold mornings, carrying the smell of snow melt from the draws, and afternoons that hold the first real warmth in months. The light was different from what he had encountered when he first arrived. It reached further. It had more intention to it, light that was beginning to remember what warmth felt like and was practicing. He stood on the rise above the hut and looked out over the 40 acres. The land was greening slowly at the lower elevation, the sage putting out new growth, a hawk moving in long, patient circles above the eastern fence line. 20 miles east, invisible from here, Covenant was going about its day. The municipal water system was drawing from an aquifer that would take years of remediation to fully clear, a process the EPA had now formally committed to, funded in part by the civil judgments working through the federal courts against what remained of the Westward Horizon's corporate structure. It would not be fast. The people of Covenant would live with the uncertainty of the remediation process for years. But it was happening. The machinery had engaged, and the evidence that had put it in motion had been collected and preserved and protected by one man in a room beneath this exact piece of ground for 13 years, because he had decided that someone should know, and that the someone should eventually be Cole. Wren called him that afternoon. The grand jury has returned an indictment, she said. 37 counts. Federal environmental crimes, conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction. The obstruction counts include documentation of interference with my father's investigation in 2007. He said nothing for a moment. Your father's name is in the indictment, he said. As the original investigator, yes. The conduct against him is part of the obstruction record. Formally. He listened to her breathing on the other end of the line. How does that feel? He asked. He did not usually ask questions like that. He asked it now because he wanted to know. She was quiet for a long moment, like something that was wrong for a very long time just got written down correctly, she said. That is the only way I can describe it. He understood exactly what she meant. He told her about the journal. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. When he finished, she said quietly, "He was watching you the whole time." "Yes," Cole said. "He knew you would come," she said. "He told me that," Cole said. "In the last entry. He said he believed I would choose it." She said gently, "He was right." Cole ended the call and stood outside as the light went gold in the western sky. The long Wyoming evening taking its time, not apologizing for how large and unhurried it was. He went back inside and made dinner in the kitchen his grandfather had built for him, using vegetables from the hydroponics module he had been tending for 3 months. He ate at the counter and afterward picked up the blue binder and read through the system's documentation. Not because he needed it anymore, but because he found the act of reading it settling in a way that had nothing to do with information. It was a document that said, here is what exists, here is how it works, here is what to do when something needs attention. He found documents like that reassuring. He always had. After dinner, he went to the hydroponics module. The basil needed thinning. Silas had said so in the recording, and again in the journal, and the plants themselves confirmed it with their crowded, competing growth. Cole worked through the section, carefully removing what was overgrown to give the remaining plants room and air. It was simple work, the kind that asked nothing of you beyond attention and patience. His hands moved through the fragrant green growth, and the warm, humid air of the module carried the smell of it everywhere, sharp and alive. He thought about the cabin he had been sketching in the evenings. Small, practical, built from materials he could source through Osley's contacts. He had Silas's technical library. He had time. He had the particular kind of patience that develops in a person who has spent 18 years learning to work with whatever is actually available rather than what should be available. He thought about the land trust contact Wren had identified, an organization working on aquifer protection in the Fremont County region. The geological surveys Silas had compiled were exactly the kind of documentation they needed and rarely had access to. He had a meeting scheduled for the following week. He finished thinning the basil and moved along the rows, checking each section, adjusting a support stake on a tomato vine that had grown beyond its guide, noting that the lettuce in the third tier was ready to cut. He had never grown anything before. He had never had the continuity that growing required, the confidence that you would be in the same place long enough to see something through from planting to harvest. That confidence had not been available to him for the first 18 years of his life. It was available now. He turned off the grow lights in the section he had finished and left the rest running on their cycle the way Silas had designed it, the way the binder specified, the way the system had been running for 13 years and would continue running because it had been built by someone who understood that the things you build to last must be able to outlast your own ability to tend them. He climbed the stairs one last time that evening and stepped outside into the dark. The stars were out in their full Wyoming abundance, the Milky Way, a structural presence across the sky rather than an atmospheric suggestion. The temperature had dropped with the evening, and the air was clean and carried the smell of new growth from the lower ground, that early season green smell of a landscape waking up from a long cold. He stood on the rise for a while. He was 18 years old. He owned 40 acres and a complex of underground spaces and a brown leather journal that documented 13 years of a man's love, expressed entirely through the act of paying attention. He had a federal case working through the courts that would not be fully resolved for years. He had a property that needed sustained management and a remediation process that needed a cooperative landowner present and committed. He had basil that needed harvesting in a week, and a cabin that needed building, and a watershed that needed someone to stay and care about it over the long term. The money in the vault was subject to legal process and would be for some time. He was more constrained than he had ever been, bound to a specific piece of ground and a specific set of responsibilities and a long ongoing relationship with the consequences of what had happened here. None of it was simple. None of it would resolve cleanly. But he was standing on ground that was his, ground that someone had spent 13 years making ready for him. Ground that held beneath it the careful evidence of a man who had believed that what was true mattered enough to preserve it, and that the right person would eventually come and know what to do with the truth. He had come. He had done something with it. He went back inside and descended, and the hydraulic lift brought the concrete slab back into place above him, with the quiet, deliberate sound of a mechanism built by someone who understood that reliability was not accidental. He walked through the habitation module with its warm light and its shelves of paperbacks and its kitchen that smelled faintly of the dinner he had made, and he sat at the desk and picked up the brown leather journal. He held it for a moment without opening it. Then he opened it to the last page and read the last entry one final time. He read the last line. He set the journal down and looked at the photograph of his mother, who had been 29 years old and brave in the way that had cost her everything, and had, by the long and indirect route of 13 years of one man's patient work, produced something that might last longer than any of them had expected. 40 acres of Wyoming ground, his grandfather's life's work. His mother's unfinished sentence finally completed. He turned off the desk lamp. In the hydroponics module, the grow lights continued their cycle. The pumps moved water through the trays. The plants grew in their rows, unhurried and certain, doing the simple and profound thing that properly tended living systems do, which is to continue. Outside on the rise above the Quonset hut, the Wyoming night moved across 40 acres of land that had held its secrets long enough and was beginning slowly, in the way that land always does, to simply be what it was. Ground. His grandfather's life, his mother's courage, his own. Ground belonging to someone now with someone to stay.